Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. I'm so excited to have our guest on the line, a very, very enlightening episode ahead of us here. We have a coffee cultivation and roasting expert on the line, Ildi Revi. How you doing, Ildi?
Hello, it's nice to talk to you and your listeners today.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you on. We're going to be talking a lot in the future for sure, but I mean, this episode might be the one I'm most excited about because for the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast, we're going to have doctors on to talk about health, and we're going to have, we're going to talk about scientific studies and talk about research and talk about chemistry and biology on the science side. But we also want to talk about coffee and kind of teach the doctors what goes into coffee and what kind of prepares the health and science side, to really take form and culminate. You're going to talk about cultivation, the production chain, the shipping chain, totally seed to cup, and I'm really excited about that. Are you ready to dive in today, Ildi?
I am ready to dive in.
Awesome. Well, what I really am most interested about is pesticides, because when we're dealing with healthy coffee and trying to create the most optimal medicinal level coffee, pesticides is something that comes up a lot, and organic is something that comes up a lot. And I think that there's a lot of buzz around that word. So when you're talking about shampoo being organic, it might be a little different than, say, your coffee, right? I mean, this is kind of a big deal.
It is a big deal, but coffee is different than other products also when it comes to organic. And that leads to some confusion because, for example, tomato or celery, something like that, you're eating the product that might have actually had sprays on them. With coffee, the outside of the coffee cherry, we call it, or berry, has a thick skin. That skin would be the thing that's exposed to the sprays. And so that skin is removed. How the skin is removed, also impacts because there could be residue. So let's say, so there's different methods. And when we talk about the seed to cup chain, I could explain more about that. But just know that there's a skin on it. And under the skin is a thin layer of fruit. And so let's say the skin is removed with water, which is one of the ways it's pulped, the skin is torn off, and then the seeds that are coated in fruit, as well as they have a thick extra skin on them that we call parchment, because when it's dry, it actually feels like parchment paper. And underneath that is a thin additional skin that we call silver skin. So imagine a peanut that has that sort of reddish brown thin skin on it.
All right.
The silver skin is not that thick, but it's something like that, where it's sort of like attached to the coffee seed.
Interesting.
So when we talk about pesticides in the spray, like all that stuff is removed. So washing is one way, but then when the coffee is in the water, there may be pesticide in the water, which could get into and enter the beans somehow through the parchment, through the silver skin. So there's that possibility. But again, it's going to be in, thousands of gallons or liters of water, and it gets washed and washed and washed and washed before it's dried. So that's the wash process method. So imagine if pesticide is sprayed on the berry. There's another method that is predominantly used, definitely in a country like Yemen that has limited water. They're going to pick the cherries and dry them with the skin on. And so that skin, and Brazil has a lot of this method. We call it natural process or dry process. So then the skin the gets really hard. I mean, it taps. It's like drumming of your fingernails, that hard. That whole thing gets hulled off. So where the pesticide might happen is during the hulling process. If there's pesticide residue on the outside of the skin during the hulling, when everything's stripped, there may be dust in the air and there may be pesticide settling on the beans. Either way, it's very different than a tomato or celery or some other fruit that's just consumable,
Right.
like an
Yeah.
apple.
My understanding is that when there is some sort of peel or some sort of exterior barrier, the certifications on pesticides that you can use is often changed. But aren't some pesticides
But
systemic?
this is exactly what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
I don't know exactly the names of pesticides that are systemic, which ones are, which ones aren't. But the organic certification is way beyond just the spraying and the growing and the fertilizing of the coffee. So this is the other thing is if we're using chemical fertilizers and other things, those definitely are systemic.
Mm-hmm.
The land usage, and then of course there's just the general sustainability and health and welfare of the
An
people
environmental impact of the chemical
and
fertilizers. Yeah.
yeah, downstream, what happens downstream of the washing facility when these pesticides are in the water and the fish. So that's a whole, like all of these things matter with the health of the coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're just talking, and the reason I want to emphasize this is because there's argument I see on the internet about how organic doesn't really matter with coffee
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't matter with quality. Well, first of all, you can have poor quality organic coffees. Why? Because they might not get the inputs they need if a farmer, is doesn't have access to some of the chemical fertilizers and they don't have access to the natural fertilizers and
And their soil isn't
you
built
know
up the biology
yeah, and
yet.
they've
They're
had
doing,
a
yeah.
big
Mm-hmm.
exactly, they've had a big, over rain that year and everything is leaching out, so these things are different, plus pests. They may have like some influx of some uh,
Yeah. More
pests
likely for
that
an infestation if your plants are unhealthy, by the way. So it kind of compounds.
exactly, so all of these things can impact quality. So quality and organic are tough.
Mm-hmm.
So a really good quality and organic coffee is it's not only rare, but it's wonderful when you can get it.
Right.
But what's really important, Jordan, that other people don't realize about the certification is that it's not just it's beyond the sustainability and all of that. The organic certification is third party assurance that the coffee has been taken care of from seed to the time it leaves the roasting operation.
Okay.
And this is an important distinction because if it's certified, there is a lot of paperwork and a lot of people are agreeing to participate in the system. So the farmer starts with the farmer, agrees to use organic practices. And there's lists of them. Now, farmers are in distant lands, and each of these countries has one, two, maybe three, four, depending how big the country is, certifying agencies that
Mm.
are accredited with USDA Organic. In other words, our government trains people there and talks to their government and their operations, and everybody's on the same page for what they're looking for.
Right.
People may argue, yeah, but really, what if somebody's bribing their official, whatever? So I don't know how
That
much that happens.
that happens
It
everywhere. You can't just point to that and say, "Okay, let's not certify anything anymore." I mean,
well,
that's gonna happen no matter what in any industry everywhere.
yeah, you're kind of stealing my thunder because that's the punchline is we can create a system that most people follow. I really look, farmers who want to go organic, they really care. They're not doing it for the price differential. No farmer's doing it for the I mean, they're doing it because they're conscientious. Farmers are
Mm-hmm.
professionals. They're not, and they're business people.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing it because they care about everything around them. They're in it for the long run.
Yeah, and seeing the big picture. Yeah.
So to just assume that because they're in a developing country, they're gonna cheat. Well, they didn't get in it to cheat. They didn't. So
Right.
I find that really disrespectful.
That's an
And
interesting
the
take.
other thing, and I also find it very disrespectful that you would assume that immediately bribes are because it's a a developing country that people are going to take bribes.
There's
I
a
mean, again,
fascinating take.
that's
Yeah.
very different. I've met these people, and they are as professional as the most professional person. Any, I mean, so
Yeah.
let's follow the chain. So the farmer has a whole set of standards that she or he has to follow.
For organic. Okay.
The auditor has a whole set of standards and checks that they check for. They have a list of paperwork they have to fill out. That's not all, folks. Once this auditor gives the farmer his or her certification, then when the coffee is sold, it goes to an exporter or a dry mill, or in some cases a wet mill. Whoever handles the coffee has to also be certified.
Wow.
So they have checks that they have to go through. What do some of these checks include? The quality of the water must be tested. Um, the where the storage of chemicals and pesticides are. Who handles the coffee? How are the people who handle the coffee trained? What bagging materials are used? What do you clean your hoppers? These big, huge metal hoppers and the green screens. So, for
Whoa.
example, you get these big, huge dry mills. If they're certified organic, they have to run all their commercial coffee or non organic coffee through their equipment, but then they've got to clean their equipment with
Mm-hmm.
a organic safe cleaner, usually alcohol is fine. And then they have to run a batch of organic coffee that's discarded through the equipment before they can run the next batch through,
Whoa. That's no
right?
joke.
So it's not a joke. And so that has to happen. Same thing needs to be bagged, needs the materials. The container that they put, the shipping container they put it in, has to have standards. The importer, the person who takes it from the exporter and does the importing of the coffee, has to be organic certified.
Mm-hmm.
So coffee comes in on these huge shipping containers, and most roasters do not deal with the shipping. They go through an importer for a number of reasons, whole other podcast. When the coffee arrives in the US, it is taken anytime it's touched, the handler has to either be organic certified or has to be noted that they have to have an affidavit that they are not certified and they touched your organic coffee.
Whoa.
Then it goes to a warehouse. The warehouse has to be certified. The warehouses are bringing in coffee from all over the world. Sometimes there are these like little moth creatures that like appear sometimes, and little bugs occasionally that will appear in coffee in these huge warehouses. The
Uh-huh.
warehouses have to isolate and spray for these things.
Sure.
Where's the organic coffee in all of this? These are the things that we have to keep track of throughout the entire process. And then now so the warehouses are certified. Then the coffee is released from the warehouse to the roaster. The roaster must be organic certified in order to have the certification on their bag. So the roaster has a lot of stuff similar to the processor. They have to they have to clean their hoppers, clean their roasters out. They have to detail their protocol in their organic application, what they clean their equipment with. And then they have to run a batch of organic coffee through the roaster that's discarded
Wow.
before they run the batch that is can be certified organic. All of the handling from the time it's at the roaster, and they have to store the coffee when they receive the coffee off the trucks. They have to check the trucks and do all this stuff. So you get the picture. So to say something is certified organic, it's more than just they didn't use pesticide and chemical fertilizers.
Wow.
What's happening is the care of the coffee from the farm and the farmer, professional person, to the professional who is roasting and packaging the coffee. Everybody along the chain is taking this chain seriously and is ensuring that that coffee is not contaminated by chemicals and is handled appropriately and is shipped carefully. It's just a much more careful food chain
Hmm.
from coming from countries around the world. So to have that certified organic label, that's what you're getting. When people say our coffee's organic, we just can't use the label because we don't want to pay for the certification. It's all, how do you really know it's what it is?
Oh,
Well,
wow.
how do I know you're saying it's organic? How do I know what you're saying is true?
Yeah.
I've got 60 people before me who have gone through an accreditation process of some sort, who each person who touches it has agreed to participate in a system versus you who just says it's organic.
That's
Which one do
fascinating.
you want to believe?
Yeah, no, and I'm right there with you. But organically grown, someone would consider was, grown with living compounds instead of your bottled, synthetic phosphorus nutrients. You're using bat guano or something. But there's more to just growing the coffee plant. Like you said, there's storage, production, transportation, roasting, all of these different practices. So that's a really good point. Having a system in place is crucial, and the fact that it's strict is a positive, a negative to some people, but a positive when it comes to the product and when it comes to the people drinking it. Can you touch on fair trade a little bit and how that compares to organic?
Fair trade has to do with the pricing of the coffee, and Fair Trade USA has a different set of standards than the Fair Trade International on how the pricing can be done and who can be priced. But it's definitely it has to do with the payment
Okay.
of prices to farmers. This is a big topic. Often people ask if the farmer was paid a fair wage for the coffee. And everybody wants to know that the people who are producing their food are also able to live well and take care of their families and do what they need to do. One of the things, fair trade is one way to do it, but not everybody goes through the fair trade system. And it's a good system, but it does have its limitations also.
Hmm.
And um, so, but it is one of those things where it verifies that the trust
Yeah, because that's
can
what
be
consumers
verified
see.
through that.
That's what the consumers
Yeah.
see as the badges on their coffee, and I think it makes them feel good, but I don't necessarily think they know exactly what it means or how impactful it is.
Yeah, it is, but there's a lot of coffee that has had fair prices, if not more than fair prices paid for the coffee. Um, and it's tough to talk about because it's business, and
Hmm.
people don't want to disclose. The farmer also doesn't want an importer to disclose what they were paid. Why? Because they have neighbors who are listening. So if the importer was to be transparent, it puts the farmer at a disadvantage. It's not fair to the farmer
Oh, I see.
to tell what they were paid either. So it's hard to disclose prices. But one of the principles we want to understand is specialty coffee, which is a coffee grade that scores 80 points or higher on an internationally recognized standard way of cupping. Any specialty coffee 80 points or higher, those farmers know what their coffee is and they're going to ask for the price, and a lot of importers will pay
Mm.
exactly what the farmer is asking for. They know what they need to make, they know what their bottom line is. It's a different bottom line in Colombia versus Peru versus Nicaragua versus Ethiopia. Any producing country, we have exchange rates, we have different foreign currencies, the strength to the dollar, uh, transportation, any of these things are involved in the pricing of the coffee. So what a farmer asks for is what the farmer gets.
Mm-hmm.
We pay our farmer, well, at Purity we pay our farmers exactly what they ask. We don't negotiate with the farmers. They want that, that's what you get. You know, and
Right.
sometimes we will even um, like just last week, I was meeting with our farmer from Colombia, and he wants to get this additional equipment for his farm. So I worked out additional payment for him for this equipment and for some other things
Oh
so
wow.
that we can support. Well, because he's an amazing farmer, he's incredible. Um, very dedicated to the health of the coffee. The cancer wards in Bogota, there's a few hospitals that he produces coffee for. So
Whoa.
and so he has this super clean, very pure coffee that he produces, and that's the same coffee that we're getting. So anyway, so pricing is a tough thing to talk about, but
But no, interesting and enlightening, and that's what we all want is, a mutually beneficial transaction where we're paying a fair price for coffee, the farmer gets to have food on his table and doesn't have to live in a land that's, soaked with pesticides and poisoned. That's what I want to ask you is kind of the direction this thing is heading. I know in the early 2000s, I believe, as Colombia was phasing out endosulfan, the very prevalent pesticide used on coffee and other plants, obviously, but coffee is so heavily treated. Um, they were outlawing the product endosulfan, and the president of Colombia, the leader of Colombia, came out and said that endosulfan is a bigger threat to the Colombian people than the coffee borer beetle itself. And that was saying something. It was because of all the horrible
mm,
health conditions that it was causing the Colombian people. Do you feel like this shift towards organic is being driven by the consumers and actually taking place worldwide and making a difference and making a change? Is this a shift, or is this just a pocket of the market? I'm hoping, I'm trying to set you up. I'm hoping that this is an overall shift that kind of everyone is getting on board with.
there's definitely been a shift happening for the last 20 years as we become aware of these chemicals and what they're doing. Some chemicals are out there. They like PCB. Remember, Florida used to have malaria, and back in the 50s, I think it was. I could be misquoting something, but they used to spray until malaria was eradicated. But then
Whoa.
this chemical was toxic, and that was um, banned. It was also used in Africa in malarial areas. And then malaria, just when it was banned, it just shot up there. So they had to find some other means. But people did realize that these chemicals were not innocuous. They were doing harm.
Right.
And even now, this is one of this generation, the millennial generation is not afraid to speak out and say what they think and research this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's definitely a trend for the better. And countries all over the world are taking control of their own standards and their
Right.
own environment.
That's what I'm hoping for.
And we have to respect that. So for Colombia to do that, I it's funny in Zimbabwe, they rejected some aid, food aid that they got from the U.S. because it was GMO.
Oh, wow.
I mean, so even though it's it's sort of hard to get your head around, they are as aware of it as we are, and they make decisions for their people too.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and we'll see how it progresses here. So, Ildi, before we wrap it up, what are we kind of replacing these pesticides with? I know that a lot of people are into integrated pest management is a really hot topic. I know a lot of people are switching to predatory bugs and things like that. What have you observed good farmers using to keep away pests, to keep away mold and that sort of things? What are the best practices now?
Well, integrated pest management is a very well used one. And what farmers are finding is that healthy plants in a healthy, balanced environment actually helps to manage the pests
Right.
better than other things. For example, there's a little bug called Antestia. It looks like a ladybug, and they have a stinger that will sting the little cherry as it's developing on the coffee plant, and it'll suck it out, so it's like empty.
Whoa.
Well, there's a wasp that lives in the same area as the Intestia, and it eats the Intestia eggs. So, and the wasps live in the forest. So,
Bring them on
so
the farms.
exactly. So so the wasps have their nests all in the forest, and then they'll come out and they'll eat the
Kick
Intestia
butt.
eggs.
Yeah, totally.
So
Totally kick their
these are
butts.
the yeah, and yeah, that's just one way. I think that's it. There are other organic methods that they use. So one of the things people talk about with organic is it's not chemical free. And that's true, but the chemicals have been highly vetted, and they're not, I mean, they're, a lot of them are organic based
Yeah,
things.
pesticides are not created equal. That's what a lot of people don't understand
Yeah.
from just some sort of like neem oil, some sort of like basic oil from the neem tree, which is a pesticide, to like an endosulfan or like a pylon, which was actually derived from wartime gases from World War II. Like pesticides really are not
Really
created
different.
equally. Yeah.
Right. Right. And these pests are important because the birds eat some of these insects, and then they lay their eggs, and it's affecting the rest of the environment. And then the
100%.
birds will eat some of the insects. So we need the bird life, and we need a balanced environment to keep things in balance.
Hmm. This has been fantastic, Ildi. Super enlightening. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much, and I hope I talk to you soon.
All right, everybody out there, thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with more Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. See you later.